The Hells Angels biker saw the little girl pulled into a whirlpool, and his strike ended the cowards who put her there. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Bayview. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the tranquil scene. The sound of waves crashing gently on the shore was the only thing breaking the silence. But then, a scream pierced the air, sharp and full of terror. A little girl, no older than 10, was being dragged into a whirlpool in the middle of the bay. Her frantic cries echoed across the water, but there was no one nearby to help. The beach was nearly empty, save for a few scattered beachgoers, none of whom seemed to notice the danger unfolding just yards away. That's when Jake Reaper Morrison, a seasoned member of the Hells Angels, heard the scream. He had just parked his Harley-Davidson near the pier, looking to take a break and stretch his legs after a long ride. As he adjusted his leather jacket and walked toward the beach, the blood-curdling scream stopped him dead in his tracks. His instincts, honed over years of living on the edge, kicked into high gear. Without a second thought, he ran toward the sound, his boots pounding against the sand. The sight that greeted him was every parent's worst nightmare. A little girl, with her arms flailing wildly, was being pulled by the current into the center of the whirlpool. Her terrified eyes locked onto his, pleading for help. The situation was critical. There was no time to waste. Jake dove into the water without hesitation, the cold waves crashing around him as he fought against the current. His leather jacket clung to his body, but it didn't matter. His focus was solely on the girl, whose cries grew fainter with each passing second. Jake's years of combat training and riding in harsh conditions had prepared him for many things, but saving a child from a deadly whirlpool was unlike anything he had faced before. He pushed himself harder, using every ounce of strength to swim toward her. His arms burned with effort, but there was no turning back now. As he reached her, the girl's body was limp, her energy almost completely spent. With a powerful grip, Jake grabbed her around the waist and pulled her toward the shore, fighting the pull of the water. It felt like an eternity, but finally, they reached the safety of the beach. Jake collapsed onto the sand, the girl still in his arms, gasping for air. He checked her pulse, relieved to find that she was still breathing, though barely conscious. He whispered reassuring words, trying to calm her as he gently laid her down. The moment was brief, but it felt like a lifetime. Jake's heart raced, his thoughts scattered, as he looked around. The scene was not yet over. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the group of cowards who had caused the girl's distress. A group of local bullies had been messing around in the water, playing with the currents and laughing as they dragged the girl into the whirlpool. They were now standing on the pier, watching the scene unfold with no remorse. Anger surged through Jake as he realized the full extent of what had just happened. These were no innocent bystanders. They were responsible for putting the girl in harm's way. His protective instincts, combined with the rage he felt for seeing such cruelty, took over. He stood up, his muscles tense, and walked toward the group, his gaze cold and deadly. Without a word, he advanced toward the cowards, his steps deliberate and threatening. The bullies froze, clearly intimidated by the biker's presence. They had underestimated him, assuming he was just another rough-looking guy with a leather jacket. But now they saw the fury in his eyes. They had no idea what was coming. With one swift movement, Jake grabbed the first bully by the collar and lifted him off the ground, his voice low and menacing. "You think it's funny to hurt a child? You have no idea what happens when you mess with someone I care about." The bully trembled, his friends backing away slowly. Jake's reputation had preceded him, and now they could feel the weight of his anger. What happened next was swift. With a few more powerful strikes, Jake took down the cowards, making sure they knew exactly who they had messed with. By the time it was over, they were on the ground, too scared to move. Jake turned back to the girl, making sure she was still safe. She was awake now, her eyes wide with fear, but there was a glimmer of gratitude in them. Jake smiled softly, his anger dissipating as he knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calming. The little girl nodded, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Thank you." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't had in years. He had saved a life today, and it felt good. But little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything for him. I could feel the tension in the air as I stood there, my boots planted firmly in the sand, staring at the girl I had just saved. Her small frame trembled, still in shock, her wide eyes scanning the beach as if expecting something else to go wrong. She had been pulled from the whirlpool, but the battle was far from over. I could still hear the laughter of the group of bullies, now scattered but still lingering near the pier, watching from a distance, too afraid to move. I knew this wouldn't be the last time I saw them. But for now, all I cared about was getting this girl to safety. I took a deep breath, pushing the anger down. I had to be calm. Her safety was my responsibility now. I knelt down beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to steady her. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," I said, my voice low, trying to soothe her. She looked at me, her lips trembling as she spoke. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered, her voice barely above a sob. My heart ached for her, but I kept my composure. "You're not alone," I reassured her. "You're with me now. You're safe." She nodded slowly, her breath still shallow. I helped her sit up, checking her over for any injuries that might need attention. Aside from a few scratches and bruises, she seemed to be okay. But there was a look in her eyes, a look that told me this experience had shaken her to her core. I had to get her to a place where she could rest, where she could feel secure. I stood, offering her my hand. "Can you walk?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, taking my hand as I helped her to her feet. We walked slowly towards my Harley, her small steps unsure but determined. I could feel her grip tighten around my arm as we reached the bike, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. I understood the fear she was still carrying. As we reached the bike, I helped her climb on behind me, making sure she was comfortable before starting the engine. The rumble of the Harley seemed to ease some of the tension in the air as we sped down the road, the cool breeze hitting my face. But I could feel her pressing against my back, her small frame still tense with fear. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but it didn't matter. I needed to get her away from the beach, away from the people who had nearly caused her death. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my eyes catching the faint figure of the bullies watching us leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The rest of the ride was quiet, just the sound of the wind and the bike's engine filling the space between us. I didn't push her to talk. I knew she needed time. We eventually reached an old diner on the outskirts of town, a place I knew was safe. I had passed by it countless times, and the owner, Rosie, was someone I trusted. I parked the bike in front of the diner and helped her off, guiding her inside. Rosie looked up from behind the counter as we walked in, her eyes scanning me for a moment before landing on the girl. "What happened?" Rosie asked, her voice full of concern. I glanced back at the girl, who was standing a little too close to me, still looking over her shoulder nervously. "She was caught in the whirlpool by the beach," I explained. "She's safe now, but she needs rest." Rosie nodded, understanding the unspoken words. "Take a seat, sweetheart," she said to the girl, gesturing to a booth in the corner. The girl walked over hesitantly and sat down, her eyes darting around the diner, still uneasy. I sat across from her, my eyes not leaving her face. She needed to feel like she was in control again, and that meant giving her space. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice gentle. "You're safe here." She nodded slowly, still unsure, but I could see the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. Rosie brought over a cup of hot cocoa and set it in front of the girl. She took it without a word, wrapping her hands around the cup, the warmth probably offering her some comfort. "You're lucky," Rosie said softly as she sat down beside me. "Most kids don't survive that whirlpool." I nodded, my mind still racing. I had been on edge ever since I saw the bullies on the pier, and now I couldn't shake the feeling that they would be back. "I know," I muttered, my gaze drifting to the window. "But that's not the worst part." Rosie raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my seat, my eyes narrowing as I thought about the situation. "Those kids on the pier," I said, my voice steady but with an edge of anger. "They didn't just stand there. They made sure she went in. They put her there. They thought it was a joke." Rosie looked at me, her expression softening. "And you're going to make sure they don't do it again?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "I will." I looked at the girl, her eyes now calm as she took a sip of the cocoa. She still looked scared, but there was something different in her gaze now. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor. And with that, I knew my job wasn't done. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me as I sat across from the girl in that old diner. Rosie had left us alone for a bit, giving me the space to think, but I wasn't sure where to begin. The girl hadn't said a word since we arrived. Her eyes had lost their frantic look, but the tension in her shoulders told me she was still processing everything that had happened. I sat there, my fingers tapping against the table, trying to figure out the next step. It wasn't just about getting her away from danger now. It was about making sure she could walk away from this with something other than fear in her heart. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. My mind kept returning to the bullies on the pier. I had seen the fear in their eyes when I confronted them, but it wasn't enough. I couldn't let them off the hook. They had pushed her into that whirlpool, and they needed to understand that their actions had consequences. But right now, the girl in front of me needed attention, not anger. I leaned forward, trying to make her feel seen. "Are you doing okay?" I asked, my voice soft but steady. She looked at me for a long moment, her small fingers still wrapped around the mug of cocoa. "I'm scared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt like I was going to die. I nodded slowly, my heart aching for her. "I know, but you're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore." She nodded, her eyes locking onto mine, her gaze steady for the first time since I'd met her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't used to hearing gratitude like that. Most people I had helped in the past didn't say thank you. They didn't care. But this girl, she was different. She saw me, not just the tough biker or the Hell's Angel. She saw me as a person who had done something good. And it hit me that I couldn't just walk away from this. I couldn't just leave her here and forget about what happened. I had to protect her. "What's your name?" I asked, wanting to connect with her, to bring her back to reality. "Lucy," she said quietly. "Lucy," I repeated, trying to smile. "That's a nice name." She shrugged, her gaze dropping to her hands. I could tell she was still trying to make sense of everything. The door to the diner opened, and Rosie walked back in, carrying a tray with 2 sandwiches. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the food in front of us. Lucy looked at the sandwiches, but then her eyes flicked back to me. "What happens now?" she asked. I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, and I knew this wasn't just about being hungry. It was about what came next in her life. She had just faced death, and now she had to figure out how to move on. I leaned back in my chair, thinking for a moment. "We're going to get you back to your family. But first, we're going to make sure you're safe," I said, my tone firm. I could see the relief in her eyes as she nodded. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said softly, the weight of the words hanging in the air. I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility settle over me. It wasn't just about saving her from the whirlpool anymore. It was about keeping her safe from whatever else life might throw her way. We finished our meal in silence, the atmosphere in the diner growing more comfortable as time passed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was still out of place. As we finished eating, I stood up, my eyes scanning the diner. "We should get going," I said, my voice low. Lucy stood, her small frame still slightly unsteady, but she had regained some of her strength. Rosie walked us to the door, giving me a quick nod. "You take care of her," she said, her voice full of concern. "You got it," I replied, giving her a quick smile. I led Lucy back outside, where my Harley was waiting. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. I wasn't sure what was waiting for me, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. We climbed onto the bike, and I could feel her small arms wrap around my waist as we took off, the engine roaring beneath us. The cool wind hit my face, but I could feel the tension in Lucy's body as she clung to me. I knew she wasn't ready to let go of the fear just yet. I wasn't sure what the next chapter of this story would be, but I knew one thing. I wasn't about to let her face it alone. The sun was beginning to set as we rode down the highway, the fading light casting long shadows across the road. We didn't talk much, but I could feel her clinging to me a little less, as if she was starting to trust me. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was riding alone. I could feel the tension starting to build up again as we cruised down the highway. The wind whipped against us, and though the ride itself was peaceful, there was a constant undercurrent of unease. Lucy's grip around my waist tightened every time we approached another town, and I could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. The world felt heavy on my shoulders, but I wasn't about to let her down. I had promised her that I would keep her safe, and that was exactly what I was going to do. We had just left the diner, and my mind was already working through the next steps. I needed to get her to a place where she could truly recover, away from the dangers that still lurked. The bullies, the Whirlpool, those were just the immediate threats. I had a feeling there was something bigger at play here, something I hadn't quite figured out yet. My Harley hummed beneath us as we rode through the small town of Cedar Ridge. It was a place I knew well, having passed through here plenty of times on my way to other destinations. It was quiet, secluded, and far from the chaos of city life. Perfect. I pulled into a small, weathered motel on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered above us, casting a soft glow over the parking lot. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions, just the way I liked it. I killed the engine and turned to Lucy. "We're staying here tonight," I said, my voice calm. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was grateful for the pause. She had been through so much, and I could feel her body start to relax, just a little. "Okay," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. We walked inside the motel office, and the elderly woman behind the counter looked up as we entered. She smiled warmly, but I could see the wariness in her eyes as she took in the sight of me, a man in leather with a Hell's Angels patch on his back. I gave her a nod and a quick smile, trying to reassure her. "Just one room for the night," I said, keeping my tone friendly. She handed me the key without a word, though I could see her sizing me up. I paid the fee and turned to lead Lucy down the narrow hallway. The room was small but clean, with 2 beds, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. I locked the door behind us and sat down on the edge of one of the beds, motioning for Lucy to sit down next to me. She hesitated at first, still holding on to the tension in her body, but then she slowly made her way over and sat down. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything she had been through. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. "You're safe here, Lucy," I said, my voice steady. "This is just for tonight. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow." She nodded, but I could see that her mind was still racing. She wasn't just scared of the Whirlpool anymore. She was scared of everything that had led up to it. The bullies, the fear of being alone, of not knowing who to trust. "What happens if they come looking for me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. I felt my stomach tighten at the question. It was a valid concern, one that I had already thought about. "They won't," I said firmly. "But if they do, I'll be ready. I won't let them hurt you." I could see her relax slightly, but there was still a layer of doubt in her eyes. It wasn't easy to trust someone after everything she'd been through. I couldn't blame her for feeling that way. I wasn't exactly a trustworthy guy myself, at least not by most people's standards. But I had a code, one that didn't let me turn my back on someone in need. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," I added, my voice softer now. "You're not alone. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." She gave me a small, uncertain smile, and I could see the tears brimming in her eyes. It broke my heart to see her like this, so young, so innocent, yet carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out into the parking lot. My mind was still spinning, still trying to make sense of what had happened. The bullies, the Whirlpool, it didn't add up. There was more to this, and I wasn't sure what it was yet. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I had made a promise to Lucy, and I wasn't going to break it. I turned back to her, my gaze softening. "I know this is a lot to process," I said, "but I need you to trust me. We'll get through this." She nodded again, her small shoulders lifting as if she were finally starting to believe me. It was a small victory, but it meant the world. I went over to the dresser and pulled out a couple of blankets. "Get some rest," I said. "You need it. We've got a long road ahead." Lucy didn't argue. She curled up on the bed, her body still tense, but finally allowing herself to relax. I kept watch for a while, the silence in the room growing comfortable, though the storm inside me wasn't over. I knew we couldn't stay here forever, but for now, this was the safest place for her. And that was enough, for tonight. I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, but the room was quiet, save for the soft sound of Lucy's breathing as she slept. The stillness felt unnatural, almost too peaceful, considering everything that had happened. I had made a promise to keep her safe, but the road ahead was still uncertain. I glanced over at the clock on the nightstand. It was past midnight, but I couldn't sleep. Not yet. The events of the day kept playing over in my mind. The whirlpool, the bullies, and that moment when I pulled Lucy from the water, none of it seemed real. But here we were, in a rundown motel room, and I knew it was only a matter of time before things got worse. I pulled my jacket on and stepped outside, the cool air hitting me like a wave. The parking lot was empty, the only sound the faint rustle of wind through the trees. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm the storm inside me. I had to keep it together. For Lucy. For myself. I walked over to the bike, running my fingers over the worn leather seat. My mind was still racing, but I needed to think clearly. The bullies, what they had done wasn't just a prank. It was deliberate. They had pushed her into that whirlpool on purpose. And for what? To scare her? Or something worse? I had a sinking feeling in my gut that there was more to this story, something I hadn't figured out yet. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that these kids weren't just a random threat. They were part of something bigger, something darker. And it wasn't just about revenge for me anymore. I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't let them hurt anyone else. My hand tightened around the grip of the bike as I looked out into the night. I knew what I had to do. I had to find them. I had to make sure they never hurt anyone again. I turned back toward the motel, my resolve hardening. I would need to talk to Lucy. She had been through enough, but she deserved to know the truth. She needed to understand that I wasn't going to let her go. Not now. Not ever. I walked back into the room and found her still asleep, curled up on the bed. Her breathing was steady, but there was a tension in her posture that spoke volumes. She had been through more in one day than most people would in a lifetime. I sat down on the edge of the bed, watching her for a moment before I gently shook her awake. "Lucy," I said softly, "we need to talk." She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and she blinked at me in confusion for a second. When she realized where she was, she sat up, pushing the blankets aside. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still tinged with fear. I could see the worry in her eyes, the remnants of the terror she had felt just hours ago. "Nothing's wrong," I said, trying to soothe her. "But we need to make a plan. They're going to come looking for you." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I could see the fear creeping back into her face. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, but then closed it again, nodding slowly. She had a right to be scared, and I didn't blame her. But I wasn't going to let her face this alone. "I'm going to find them, Lucy," I said firmly. "I'm going to make sure they don't hurt you, or anyone else, ever again. You don't have to worry about that." She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe me. I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, but then she nodded, her expression softening just a little. "I trust you," she said quietly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was all I needed. "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Now get some rest. We'll leave in the morning. I'll keep you safe, I promise." She nodded again, but I could tell that sleep was still a long way off for her. She was still shaken, still processing everything. But at least now, she had someone to rely on. Someone who would do whatever it took to protect her. I stood up, pulling the chair over to the window, and sitting down, keeping a watchful eye on the parking lot outside. The night was silent, but the quiet felt too heavy, as though it was holding its breath. I knew the calm wouldn't last. It never did. The bullies would come, and when they did, I'd be ready. It wasn't just about protecting Lucy anymore. It was about making sure that no one else ever went through what she had. That's why I was here. That's why I couldn't stop. The clock on the nightstand ticked steadily, the seconds passing as I watched the moonlight filter through the blinds. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. The night had passed in a haze of silence, the kind that makes you question whether anything is really settled. Lucy had managed to fall asleep in the end, but the restless look on her face showed she hadn't completely let go of the fear. I hadn't either. I'd spent the night staring out the window, listening to the wind and the occasional distant sound of a car passing by. The world outside felt cold, distant, and full of threats. We couldn't stay here forever. At some point, we had to face whatever was coming. It was still early, the first light of dawn creeping through the blinds. I stood up from the chair and stretched my stiff muscles, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Lucy was still asleep, but it wouldn't last. I knew that. She had a way of waking up before the sun had fully risen, as though the nightmares in her mind wouldn't let her sleep for too long. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the small coffee maker in the corner of the room and sat back down, waiting for her to stir. She eventually shifted, her eyelids fluttering before she opened her eyes and looked at me. "Morning," I said, trying to sound calm. She nodded slowly, sitting up on the bed and rubbing her eyes. "Did you sleep?" she asked, her voice still groggy from sleep. "I didn't," I said, my voice steady. "I'm used to it." She nodded again, as if she understood. I could see it in her eyes, the way she was trying to process everything, the way she was holding back the emotions. She wasn't just a little girl caught in a whirlpool anymore. She was someone who had faced death and seen what it could do to people. She was learning the harsh reality of the world, just like I had. "We need to leave soon," I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket. "There's a place I know that's safe. We'll be able to figure things out from there." She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "What about those kids?" she asked, her voice small, almost hesitant. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "I'm going to make sure they don't hurt anyone else," I said firmly. "You don't need to worry about them. Not anymore." She seemed to relax a little at that, but the unease was still there, hanging in the air between us. I couldn't blame her. This wasn't the kind of world a child should have to understand. I grabbed the keys to the Harley and handed them to her. "Here, take a seat on the bike. I'll be right behind you." She took the keys from me with a slight nod, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I wasn't sure if it was fear or just uncertainty. Either way, I understood. We were about to head into something bigger than either of us had anticipated. But we had no choice. I couldn't let her face it alone, and I wouldn't back down now. We left the motel room quietly, not wanting to draw attention. As we walked out, I felt the weight of what I had promised. Keeping her safe was one thing, but stopping whatever was coming, that was a different kind of challenge. The sun was beginning to rise as we made our way to the bike, and I could feel the heat of the day starting to press against us. I helped Lucy climb onto the bike, adjusting the helmet on her head. She looked up at me, and for the first time, there was a small spark of trust in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I revved the engine, the sound vibrating through the ground as we pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road. The wind hit us as we picked up speed, the air cool and sharp against my skin. The road stretched out ahead of us, and I knew we were headed towards something that wasn't going to be easy. We didn't speak much as we rode, the only sound between us the engine and the wind. I could feel Lucy's grip tightening around my waist as we hit the highway, but she said nothing. She was still processing, still figuring out what this new world meant for her. It wasn't easy to just turn the page and move on, but we had no choice. The road ahead was full of possibilities, but it was also full of danger. I knew it wouldn't be long before we ran into trouble, but I wasn't about to stop. I couldn't. We made our way through a couple of small towns, the scenery changing with each passing mile. The place I was headed was a little more secluded, a place where I knew we could stay hidden for a while. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would give us the time we needed. As we neared our destination, I could feel the tension in my shoulders start to ease. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. We were far from safe, but I was determined to keep Lucy out of harm's way. No one was going to hurt her again. Not on my watch. We pulled up to a small cabin at the edge of a forest, the kind of place I'd stayed in before. It was isolated, quiet, and most importantly, safe. I stopped the bike and helped Lucy off, making sure she was steady on her feet. I could see the exhaustion on her face, but there was something else there, too. A sense of hope, maybe. A sense that we could make it through this. I wasn't sure what the next move was, but I knew we couldn't stay here forever. We'd have to figure out where to go next, what the plan would be. But for now, at least, we were safe. I looked over at Lucy, who was standing beside me, her eyes scanning the forest. "You ready?" I asked, my voice calm. She nodded, just a little, and I could see the trust in her eyes. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm ready." I could hear the sound of the wind rustling through the trees as I stood outside the cabin, my hands on my hips, scanning the surroundings. The forest was dense, and the silence was almost unnerving, but it was the kind of silence I had grown accustomed to over the years. Lucy was inside, sitting on the couch, staring out the window. I could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. She hadn't said much since we arrived, and I didn't push her to speak. I understood that the trauma from the past few days was still too fresh for her. But I had to keep moving. We had to make a plan, and the clock was ticking. I stepped back inside the cabin, closing the door quietly behind me. The place was small but cozy, with a fireplace crackling in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered right now. I walked over to the couch and sat down next to Lucy, who didn't look at me but seemed to sense my presence. "We need to talk," I said softly, my voice breaking the stillness in the room. She turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine, but there was a distance in them, a barrier I couldn't quite break through. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty that came from not knowing what came next. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise." She nodded, but I could see the skepticism in her face. She had no reason to trust anyone, not after everything she had been through. I didn't blame her. It was hard to trust a world that had just shown you its darkest side. "We can't stay here forever," I continued, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We have to figure out where to go next." She looked down at her hands, twiddling her fingers nervously. "What if they come after me?" she asked, her voice trembling. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "They won't," I said firmly. "I won't let them. I'm going to make sure of that." I could see her trying to hold back the tears. She was afraid, and who could blame her? But I had made a promise, and I intended to keep it. I stood up and walked over to the window, my mind racing with the possibilities. The bullies, those kids, were still out there, somewhere. I had to find them, and I had to make sure they understood that hurting her was not something they would get away with. The longer I thought about it, the more I realized how deep this went. This wasn't just some prank or accident. The bullies had deliberately put her in danger. They were part of something bigger, something darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than just a random act of cruelty. I turned back to Lucy, who was still sitting on the couch, watching me quietly. "I'm going to take care of this," I said. "We'll make a plan. But for now, you need to rest. You've been through too much already." She nodded slowly but didn't say anything. I could tell she wasn't ready to trust me fully, and that was okay. She would in time. I walked over to the door, pausing for a moment before stepping outside again. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the trees. The quiet of the forest seemed to stretch on forever, and, for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could make it through this. But I knew better. The calm wouldn't last. I had to find those kids. I had to make them understand that there were consequences for what they did. I wasn't just going to let them walk away. I had spent years riding on the edge, living a life where right and wrong were often blurred. But this was different. This wasn't about loyalty to a club or proving myself. This was about protecting someone who needed it. I wasn't going to fail her. I couldn't. I spent the next hour walking through the woods, my mind focused on the task ahead. I didn't know exactly where to find the bullies, but I knew they weren't going to stay quiet for long. They would talk, and when they did, I would be ready. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. It was peaceful, but it felt like the calm before the storm. I wasn't sure how long I'd been walking when I heard the faint sound of voices. Low, murmured voices, coming from a clearing up ahead. I stopped in my tracks, crouching down behind a tree and peering out toward the source of the sound. There they were, 3 of the bullies from the beach, standing in a small circle, talking in hushed tones. They didn't see me, and I took the opportunity to move closer. I had to hear what they were saying. As I crept forward, I could make out snippets of their conversation. They were nervous, talking about what had happened at the beach, but I could hear the guilt in their voices, the fear that they were in trouble. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I stepped forward, making sure my boots didn't crunch on the leaves, and I listened closer. It wasn't just about the whirlpool. They were talking about someone else, someone who had been pulling the strings. It hit me like a punch in the gut. There was someone else behind this. Someone who had orchestrated it. I wasn't just dealing with a few misguided kids. I was dealing with something much bigger. Something darker. I had to act fast. The realization that this wasn't just a bunch of bored kids messing around hit me like a ton of bricks. There was someone else pulling the strings, someone far more dangerous. These kids weren't the real threat. They were just pawns in a much bigger game. I stayed hidden behind the tree, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to their conversation. They were nervous, fumbling over their words, but the fear in their voices told me everything I needed to know. Whatever they were involved in, it was serious. "You think we're safe?" one of them asked, his voice shaky. "After what happened at the beach?" The others were silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. "We didn't mean to hurt her," another voice muttered. "But we had to. He told us to." That was the line I needed to hear. He. Who was this person they were referring to? I leaned in closer, barely breathing as I waited for more. "We gotta keep our mouths shut," the first voice said. "He'll come after us if we talk. We're in too deep now." I clenched my fists. There it was. Whoever this person was, they had threatened these kids to keep them quiet. They weren't just involved in a prank gone wrong. They were part of something much darker. And now it was my job to figure out who he was and what the hell they were all involved in. I moved back silently, keeping my distance, but my mind was racing. This was no longer just about protecting Lucy. It was about uncovering the truth behind what had happened. And I had to do it fast before anyone else got hurt. I headed back to the cabin, my mind spinning. When I walked through the door, Lucy was standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. She looked at me with wide eyes, her face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shut the door behind me, locking it and making sure the windows were secure. "They're not just a bunch of kids," I said, my voice low and firm. "They're working for someone. Someone who told them to hurt you." Her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "What? Who?" I shook my head. "I don't know yet, but I'll find out. I promise." She took a step forward, her eyes searching mine. "But I don't want you to get hurt," she said softly. "I just want this to be over." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. She was just a kid, caught in the middle of something she shouldn't even have to know about. I couldn't let her see the darkness that had been following me for years. I had to protect her from that. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I'll take care of this. I'll make sure no one hurts you again." I saw the tiniest glimmer of trust in her eyes, but I knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. I had to prove to her that I could protect her. I had to get to the bottom of this. I walked over to the table and sat down, pulling out my phone. I needed to get more information, track down these kids, and find out who the hell they were working for. But I couldn't do it alone. I knew a few people in town who might be able to help. The next few hours were a blur of calls, text messages, and digging into anything I could find on these kids. They didn't have much of a digital footprint, too smart for that, but I managed to dig up a few leads. One of them had a known connection to a local gang, but it didn't add up. The more I looked, the more it seemed like these kids were just pawns in a much bigger operation. But who was the king behind it all? That's what I needed to find out. I rubbed my eyes, exhausted from the lack of sleep, but there was no time to rest. Lucy needed me, and I couldn't afford to let her down. I grabbed my jacket and looked over at her. She was still sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. Her silence was deafening, and I knew she was still processing everything that had happened. "I'll be back soon," I told her, trying to sound reassuring. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with worry. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to find out who's behind this," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Stay here. Lock the door, and don't let anyone in. I'll be right back." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful," she whispered. I gave her a quick smile, though it didn't feel reassuring. I didn't want her to be scared, but I knew the truth. This was far from over. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. The sun had set, and the dark forest around the cabin felt like it was closing in. I knew where I needed to go, the one place where I might find the answers I was looking for. A bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where people with questions went when they wanted answers. I didn't like going there, but it was the best shot I had. I climbed onto my Harley and revved the engine, feeling the familiar rumble beneath me. The road ahead was dark, but I didn't need light to know what was coming. I had a target now, and I wasn't going to stop until I got the truth. The bar was quiet when I pulled up, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the dark. I didn't have to look far. The man I was looking for was sitting at the corner booth, a drink in his hand. I approached, my boots making no sound on the cracked tile floor. "You got answers for me?" I asked, my voice steady, but there was a coldness to it that wasn't lost on him. He looked up slowly, recognition flashing in his eyes. I didn't wait for him to speak. "I know what you're involved in," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And I'm not leaving here until you tell me everything." I could see the fear in his eyes before he even spoke. The man was sitting there, his fingers wrapped around the glass, but his grip was shaky. He knew exactly what I was talking about, and the weight of the situation settled between us like a heavy fog. I wasn't in the mood for games. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I'm not leaving here until I get what I came for, I said, my voice calm but firm. He glanced at the door, then back at me, as if weighing his options. I didn't give him time to decide. I know you're involved with those kids, the ones who pushed her into the whirlpool. I continued, leaning forward, my gaze intense. I know there's more to this, and you're going to tell me everything. He opened his mouth, then shut it, clearly trying to find the right words. Look, I don't know what you think you know, he began, his voice low. But I'm just a guy who works here. I don't have anything to do with. I cut him off, my tone sharpening. You're lying. You know exactly who's behind all of this, and I'm not leaving until you tell me. There was a moment of silence, and then, finally, he spoke. It's bigger than you think, man, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Those kids, they're just pawns. They don't even know what they're getting themselves into. The guy they're working for, he's got connections. Big ones. I could feel my blood run cold. Who is he? I demanded, my eyes narrowing. He hesitated, his gaze darting around the room, as if searching for an escape. I can't say, he muttered. He'll kill me if I do. You don't know what you're dealing with. I leaned in closer, my face inches from his. If you don't start talking, I'll make sure you regret it. You're already in this up to your neck. Help me, and maybe you'll get out alive. The man swallowed hard, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but then the door to the bar swung open, and two figures stepped inside, their presence heavy in the air. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively stood up, turning my back to them. They weren't just any two guys. They were part of the same group I was trying to take down. The men looked around the room, their eyes landing on me. You're in the wrong place, one of them said, his voice gruff. I didn't flinch. I'd been in worse situations before. But this was different. They were here for a reason, and I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of scaring me. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, my voice steady. I could feel the tension building as they took a step closer. The man I was talking to was now frozen in fear, his eyes flicking nervously from the newcomers to me. You're really going to do this? The second man asked, a twisted smirk crossing his face. You don't know who you're messing with. I wasn't intimidated. I knew exactly who I was dealing with, and I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. I met their gaze with a cold, unyielding stare. If you want me to leave, you're going to have to make me, I said. The first man's hand moved toward the gun at his waist, but before he could pull it out, I was already moving. I grabbed the nearest bottle, smashing it over his head, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious, as the second man lunged at me. I dodged his strike, my hand grabbing a nearby chair and swinging it at him. It connected with his chest, knocking him off balance. I didn't waste a second. As he stumbled back, I kicked the chair into his legs, sending him crashing to the floor. The fight was over in seconds. The man who had been talking to me was still lying on the floor, out cold, and the other two were both down. I wiped the sweat from my brow, breathing heavily as I surveyed the scene. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't afford to let that stop me. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let these guys scare me away. I turned back to the man who had tried to help me. Who is he? I asked again, my voice quieter but still firm. The man was still shaking, but he nodded slowly. His name's Viper, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's the leader of a biker gang, the Crimson Wolves. They've got control of everything in this town. The kids, they were just the start. They've got bigger plans, things that involve more than just a few kids and some stupid prank. My stomach turned as the realization hit me. Viper. The Crimson Wolves. It made sense now. They were behind everything. They were the ones pulling the strings, using kids like pawns in their twisted games. I felt the anger rising inside me. I had no choice now. I had to stop them. But how? How do you bring down a gang that controls everything? Where can I find him? I asked, my voice hard. The man looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know, he said, shaking his head. But I can tell you one thing. You don't want to go after him. He's too powerful. I looked him dead in the eyes. I don't care how powerful he is, I said. I'm going to stop him. And I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. I could feel the air grow thick with tension as the weight of the man's words sank in. Viper. The Crimson Wolves. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed wasn't one I was ready for. A biker gang, with control of this town. This was bigger than anything I had anticipated. I knew I was in deep now. I had no choice but to push forward. I wasn't about to back down. Not after everything Lucy had gone through. Not after everything I had sacrificed. The man in front of me was still shaken, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he looked at me. I knew I had just crossed a line. I wasn't playing by the rules anymore. I was going to have to deal with the wolves, but first, I needed to get to Viper. Where can I find him? I repeated, my voice low and demanding. He swallowed hard, eyes darting around the bar like he was looking for a way out. But there was no escape. Not now. You don't know what you're asking, he muttered. Viper's not just some guy you can confront. He's got muscle everywhere. Police, business owners, everyone. He's got his fingers in every pie in this town. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to lash out. This wasn't the time to lose control. I had to think. I had to get the information I needed without bringing more attention to myself. I leaned in closer, my voice cold. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Where is he? The man flinched, then sighed in defeat. There's a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Old industrial complex. That's where they meet. But I'm warning you. If you go there, you're walking straight into the lion's den. I didn't hesitate. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the counter for the trouble. The man didn't follow me, but I knew he was still watching, probably hoping I'd turn around and walk away. I didn't. I walked out of the bar and made my way back to my bike. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I had a plan now, or at least the beginning of one. I had to find Viper, take him down, and end this nightmare. I revved the engine of my Harley, the deep rumble shaking the night air. I didn't look back. I wasn't going to stop until I found the answers I was looking for. The ride to the warehouse was tense. Every mile felt like I was getting closer to a storm that was waiting to break. The town was quiet as I passed through it, but the further I got from the center, the more deserted it felt. The industrial complex loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the darkening sky. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I approached. The place looked abandoned, but I knew better. Viper wouldn't make it that easy. I parked my bike in the shadows, making sure I wasn't seen. I approached the entrance carefully, my senses on high alert. The place was too quiet. I could hear the distant sound of engines, the soft murmur of voices. They were here. They were waiting for something. I wasn't sure if it was me or something else, but I wasn't about to walk in blindly. I stayed hidden in the shadows, observing. It didn't take long before I saw them. Two men standing by the door, watching the road. They were big, wearing the same leather jackets with the Crimson Wolves patch that I'd seen earlier. I needed to find a way in without drawing attention to myself. I waited, watching for an opening. I could feel the adrenaline starting to surge in my veins, but I kept my breathing steady. It wasn't just about getting inside anymore. It was about making sure I was ready for what was coming. The last thing I needed was to be caught off guard. After a few minutes, one of the men stepped away from the door and started walking toward a nearby truck. I saw my chance. I moved quickly, keeping low to the ground. I was almost to the door when I heard a voice. Hey! I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I turned slowly to see the other guard looking directly at me. He was only a few feet away, and I could see the recognition in his eyes. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, grabbing the guard by the collar and slamming him against the wall. I don't want to hurt you, I growled. But if you don't stay quiet, you won't like what happens next. The man's eyes widened, but he stayed silent, his breath quickening as I held him there. You're going to let me in, I said, my voice low and dangerous. And you're not going to say a word. Understand? He nodded, his eyes darting between me and the door. Good, I muttered, pushing him back and stepping into the building. The inside was dimly lit, with metal beams overhead and old equipment scattered around. I could hear voices coming from deeper within. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I moved carefully, making sure to stay out of sight. I couldn't afford to make a sound. The last thing I wanted was for someone to alert Viper or his men that I was here. The voices grew louder as I neared a large room at the back of the warehouse. I peeked around the corner and saw them, Viper and a handful of his men, gathered around a table, talking in low voices. This was it. This was my chance. I had to make it count. I could feel my heart racing as I stood in the shadows, watching Viper and his men gathered around the table. I knew this was my moment, my chance to finally take down the man behind everything. I could see the tension in the air as Viper leaned forward, his voice low and commanding. He was talking about something, but the words were hard to make out from my position. I couldn't waste any more time. I had to act, and I had to act now. I steadied my breath and took a step forward, keeping my movements silent and deliberate. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, but I kept my cool. I was used to this kind of pressure. The danger, the stakes, it didn't matter. Not anymore. I was here to stop Viper, and that's exactly what I was going to do. As I moved closer, I caught a snippet of Viper's voice, louder this time. The town's ours now. Nobody gets in our way. Not the cops, not the businesses, nobody. My blood boiled at his words. He was using these kids, these people, to get what he wanted, and I couldn't let him get away with it. I crouched low, moving silently as I approached the doorway. I could hear the faint sound of metal scraping against concrete, and the tension in the room was palpable. I knew I had only a few seconds to make my move before someone noticed me. I peered around the corner, spotting Viper at the head of the table, surrounded by his men. The man was tall, with sharp features and a cold, calculating look in his eyes. The kind of man who had no problem using fear to get what he wanted. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't about to let this go on any longer. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to Lucy, just to let her know I was about to confront him. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket and made my move. I didn't wait for the perfect moment. There was no time for that. I burst into the room, my boots hitting the concrete with a loud thud. The men around the table froze, their eyes snapping to me, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. But it was too late. I was already on the move, my eyes locked on Viper. This ends now, I said, my voice steady and firm. Viper's eyes narrowed, a cold smile crossing his face. You think you can stop me? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. You think you can just walk in here and take me down? You don't know who you're messing with. I didn't flinch. I know exactly who I'm messing with. I replied, my voice low and controlled. And I'm not leaving until you're done. Without warning, Viper stood up, his hand reaching for the gun at his side. But I was faster. I rushed forward, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back. He grunted in pain, but I didn't let up. The room exploded into chaos as his men scrambled to grab their guns, but I was already on top of them. One of Viper's men lunged at me, but I sidestepped him, sending him crashing into the table. Another tried to grab me from behind, but I elbowed him in the gut, knocking the wind out of him. Viper tried to break free, but I kept him in a tight hold. You're not going anywhere, I growled. The sounds of the struggle filled the room, but I kept my focus. This was it. This was the moment that would end everything. I could see the fear in Viper's eyes now, a glimmer of realization that maybe he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. You think you're in control? I spat, tightening my grip. You're nothing but a bully hiding behind a gang. Viper struggled against me, but he couldn't break free. You don't understand, he snarled. This is bigger than you. The wolves, the town, it's all part of a plan. You're just a pawn in a game you'll never win. I froze. The wolves. The plan. It was bigger than just this town. I had known something was off, but hearing it from him made it real. This wasn't just about control. It was about something much more dangerous. Viper was part of a bigger network, one that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. I could feel my grip tightening as the pieces started to come together. What do you mean? I demanded. What's the plan? Viper didn't answer. Instead, he struggled again, this time with more force, trying to break free from my hold. But I wasn't about to let him go. Not now. I slammed him into the wall, my voice low and menacing. Tell me what you're planning, or I'll make you regret it. Viper's eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, but also defiance. You'll never stop it, he muttered. You don't know who you're up against. I was done talking. I raised my fist and hit him hard in the gut, knocking the air out of him. You'll tell me everything, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. I could feel the power shift. Viper was broken, and he knew it. I wasn't going to stop until I had everything. He was about to spill everything he knew. It was time to bring down the wolves, and it was going to happen tonight. I could feel the power shift as Viper's defiance started to break. The man, who had thought himself untouchable, was now at my mercy. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, were now filled with fear, and it felt good. But as much as I wanted to take pleasure in his discomfort, I couldn't let myself get distracted. I needed answers, and I wasn't leaving without them. Tell me what I want to know, Viper, I growled, pressing him harder against the wall. The wolves. The plan. Everything. You don't get to walk away from this. His chest heaved as he struggled for breath, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't speak. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he began. You think it's just about this town? He spat. You think it's just about some kids and a stupid prank? I kept my grip tight, but I didn't answer. He needed to say it. This town, these people, it's all part of a much bigger operation, he said, his voice now sounding more desperate. The Crimson Wolves aren't just a local gang. We're part of something larger, a network that controls everything, from the cops to the businesses to the drug trade. And the town? It's just the beginning. We're going nationwide. I froze. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had known Viper was bad news, but this was something else entirely. He was talking about something far beyond my understanding, something that could destroy more than just this town. I stepped back, my mind racing. You're part of a criminal empire, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, processing what he'd just revealed. He smirked, the remnants of his arrogance creeping back into his tone. It's not just about control, he continued, his voice quieter now, but still full of venom. It's about power. It's about owning everything and everyone. We use fear, manipulation, money. It's all a game. And I'm winning. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. This wasn't just about kids being cruel. This was a well-organized network of corruption, and Viper was at the center of it all. He had used those kids, used Lucy, as a means to an end. And now it was my turn to take him down. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my mind. Where's the next step? I demanded. Where do you take this next? He laughed, the sound dark and hollow. You're too late, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. It's already in motion. We've got everything set up, more cities, more people. It's already spreading like wildfire. You think you can stop us? You think you're the hero here? I didn't say anything. His words were like poison, but I couldn't afford to let it sink in. I needed to focus. I needed to find a way to stop this. And the first step was taking Viper down. I stepped back, pulling him away from the wall. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, but I knew there was no turning back now. You're going to regret ever starting this, I said coldly. I'm going to make sure of it. Before he could say anything else, I shoved him into one of his men who had just entered the room, knocking both of them to the ground. The other men in the room looked up in surprise, their hands instinctively reaching for their guns. But before they could react, I grabbed the nearest chair, smashing it over the head of one of the men, sending him sprawling to the ground. The chaos in the room erupted as the remaining men tried to draw their weapons, but I was already on the move. I disarmed one, knocking him unconscious with a quick strike to the head. The last one tried to escape, but I caught him by the arm, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. Stay down. I growled, my breath heavy with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I turned back to Viper, who was now struggling to stand, his men incapacitated around him. He was breathing hard, his face contorted in pain and fear. He wasn't the kingpin anymore. I was the one in control. It's over, I said, my voice cold. You're done. He glared at me, his eyes full of hate. You think this is the end? He sneered. You think taking me down is going to stop what's coming? You don't even know what you're up against. I took a step closer, my gaze never leaving his. I don't need to know what's coming, I said quietly. I just need to know that you won't hurt anyone else. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, dialing the number of the one person I knew could help. I didn't want to rely on anyone else, but this was bigger than me. I needed backup. You're going to rot in a cell, I said as the phone rang, not looking at Viper. And I'm going to make sure your empire falls apart. The phone picked up, and I spoke into it, my voice steady and resolute. It's time to take down the wolves. Viper's face twisted into a snarl, but he didn't speak. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He knew it was over. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. And as I turned my back to him, I knew that this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but I had won this round, and I wasn't going to stop until the wolves were completely destroyed. I stood there, my phone still in my hand, as the weight of what had just happened settled in. Viper, the Crimson Wolves, and the network he had built, it was all crumbling, piece by piece. The police were on their way, and with the evidence we had, Viper's empire would fall. But even as I stood there, feeling the rush of victory, I couldn't help but wonder if it was enough. Was it really over? Or was this just the beginning of something even bigger? I looked over at Viper, who was now cuffed and slumped against the wall, the fear in his eyes still lingering. His arrogance had shattered, and there was nothing left but a man who knew he was about to lose everything. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message was clear. I had won, but there were still too many questions, too many unknowns. I couldn't let my guard down. Not yet. I turned and walked out of the room, the heavy footsteps of the police following behind me. The warehouse, once a symbol of Viper's power, now felt empty, hollow. It was over. I stepped into the cool night air, the calm after the storm settling over me. But there was still a weight on my chest. Lucy. She was safe now, but was she really free from all of this? I needed to see her. I had to make sure she was okay. The ride back to the cabin felt different this time. The wind hit my face with the same intensity, but now it felt like a release. The tension was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. I pulled up in front of the cabin, cutting the engine. I looked over at Lucy, who was standing at the door, her eyes wide as she saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. She had been through more than any child should have to face, but she had come out of it stronger. And that's all that mattered now. It's over, I said finally, my voice soft, but firm. Viper's done. The wolves are finished. Lucy didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at me, as if she was trying to process the finality of it all. Then, slowly, she walked toward me and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a big gesture, but it was everything. It was a sign that she was okay, that she was safe, and that we could move forward. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thank you for saving me. I hugged her back, a sense of warmth spreading through me. I wasn't a hero, not in the way people imagined. But in that moment, I felt like one. I had kept my promise. I had kept her safe. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done something right. I pulled away from her, ruffling her hair. You're welcome, I said, a small smile forming on my lips. You're stronger than you think. She smiled back, and for the first time, it was genuine. It wasn't a smile born of fear or uncertainty. It was a smile of relief. She was finally free. We stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. The weight of everything that had happened, the chaos, the fear, it was all behind us now. But there was one more thing I needed to do. We're going to be okay, I said, looking down at her. We'll figure things out. Together. She nodded, her eyes shining with a kind of hope I hadn't seen before. Together, she said softly. As I stood there with her, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not just the end of the fight, but the beginning of something new. A new chapter, where Lucy could grow up without fear, without the shadows of the past hanging over her. We still had a long road ahead of us. But as long as we faced it together, I knew we could handle whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future was something worth looking forward to. The road wasn't over, but it was ours to walk. And with Lucy by my side, I knew we'd be all right. In this gripping Hell Angels story, we follow a hardened biker as he confronts a dangerous gang leader, Viper, and takes on the corrupt empire built by the Crimson Wolves. The biker has sworn to protect a young girl who was cruelly thrown into a whirlpool as part of the Wolves' dark scheme. As the story unfolds, secrets are revealed, leading the biker to a larger criminal network that controls the town and far beyond. Hell Angel stories are known for their raw intensity and high-stakes action, and this one is no different, with unexpected twists and fierce confrontations. The biker's journey is a tale of redemption and survival as he fights to bring justice to those who have been wronged. With every passing moment, the tension builds, and the biker must face not only his toughest adversaries, but also his own inner demons. As the Hell Angels stories go, this one is packed with emotion, action, and a fierce determination to right the wrongs of the past. When it seems like all hope is lost, the biker's resolve leads him to triumph over the Crimson Wolves, bringing peace to a troubled town. This Hell Angel story is a perfect example of what happens when a determined individual takes on a criminal empire that has been lurking in the shadows for too long. In the end, the biker's promise to protect the innocent is fulfilled, but the road ahead is still uncertain. leaving the door open for more Hell Angel stories to come.